Welcome to the Modern Husbands podcast, where Dr. Ross, Christian, and Brian host national experts who share ideas to manage money and the home as teammates. Today's guest is Dr. Michael Gene Thomas. Today, we will discuss his book, Black Financial Culture: Building Wealth from the Inside Out. Dr. Thomas is also a lecturer at the University of Georgia, where he teaches financial planning, housing, and consumer economics. His research involves understanding what factors influence financial well-being across socio-economic status and how to optimize those factors through evidence-based interventions or therapeutic methods. Dr. Thomas has won numerous teaching awards, and we promise that you will enjoy his teaching today. Enjoy the episode.
Michael, thank you so much for being with us again. Our first repeat podcaster. This is exciting.
Let's go.
Always a pleasure to have you on. And I know we're talking about your new book, Black Financial Culture: Building Wealth from the Inside Out. So can you tell us a little bit about why you decided to write this book?
Yeah. So first and foremost, I appreciate you all inviting me back. Actually,
the appreciation.
Yeah, and you all were proactive about reaching out to me and saying, "Hey, would you like to come onto our platform and to discuss this?" And I'm incredibly grateful and appreciative of this relationship, and just being given this space to just kind of talk about this passion project of mine, and that's literally what it is. One of the big things for me has been, and I've felt some guilt about this, is because the further I've gone in my career professionally and in working in academia, and then also then navigating a lot of the financial related organizations, is that I actually feel like I'm shifting further and further away from the issues and the struggles that family, friends, loved ones, people from my community that I grew up in are still dealing with today. So for instance, I'm from Gary, Indiana. Things had gotten so bad as we were actually entering into the pandemic, and even worse as we were navigating it, is that the city of Gary did not have enough funding to consistently do trash pickup. So what members of the community were doing was that they were dumping their trash in abandoned buildings, in which we have a lot of abandoned buildings. There was a bill that was recently passed in Indiana, and soon to be mayor of Gary has been working diligently on that to be able to get some funding to deal with the urban blight and all these other different things. So we're definitely moving in a much better direction. But when I go home for like the holidays and I meet with friends and engage with people that I grew up with, it's a very different experience than I experienced in Athens. It's a very different experience that I experience in the circles that I navigate. Like Christian, Bruce, and Brian, like if I brought you home with me, you're gonna be like, "What? Where the hell am I?" Because it is a very different world that we are navigating in those spaces. So for me, writing this book was a passion project because it was like, all right, I've gotten to a good point in my life. I've been able to navigate some emotional hangups that I've dealt with, some trauma that I've dealt with, some anxiety that I've dealt with based on my experiences of navigating that space, how I internalized that space, and then how it manifested in my life, whether positively or negatively. And I was just in a spot where I said, I could actually write about this in a way where I feel as if I can actually provide some value, and more specifically, value for the people that are still in those spaces and trying to figure out how to navigate those spaces. Because think about it this way, oftentimes when I go and give presentations, I do not lead with judgment. I don't lead with shame. I don't lead with guilt and all these other different things, right? But what I found is that the very people that I'm trying to help, oftentimes they are judging me because their perception is that I can't understand where they're coming from or where they're going through, because they only see me in terms of where I am. They don't know anything about my background and my history. And one of the things that I usually lead with students, I was like, do you remember in Atlanta when they used to have bankhead projects? Like for real, right? When I was in college, I had a cousin who lived in bankhead projects, and on breaks, holidays, X, Y, and Z, that's exactly where I was. I would literally be leaving a private institution in Georgia, and on my holidays and breaks, I'm literally in bankhead projects. Like, in what life does that happen, right? And I know for some people, they do navigate these extremes. And that literally is an extreme, because if I'm at the private institution, you wouldn't think that I come from where I come from. And then if I'm in bankhead projects and you see me, you wouldn't think that I'm attending this private institution. Right? So I completely get the paradigm. So my goal here in writing this book was to write something that was readable, that wasn't overly academic, that is something that people can see themselves in the book. And as we think about the trans-theoretical model of change, is to nudge them from pre-contemplative state to contemplative state. And that's the way that I've kind of thought about this, and the way that I wanted to kind of communicate these messages, but doing it in a way that somebody from back at home, more specifically my mom, would pick it up and read it and get some value out of it. And I always said, like, if I write this book and my mom won't read it and she can't understand it, and she doesn't like reading, I'm just being very true. If she were here right now, she would tell you the same thing. She doesn't like reading. But when I gave her a copy,
we need the audio book then.
I know, right? It's coming, right? And I've already cloned my voice for using AI, and I'll be using artificial intelligence to do the audiobook for the book. So that'll be coming pretty soon. So the idea here was that at the end of the day, I'm like, if my mom reads it, I've won. Right? And when she read it in a day and a half. She absolutely loved it. And then she wanted to share it with other people. She was like, can I get some copies to give to this person? I was like, all right, within my family. Right. And I was like, all right, that's the win. That's the legacy builder. That's the piece that lives beyond me. Right. And I've always found that to be an interesting thing about books, is that when you write them, and if you write something that resonates, it literally has the opportunity to live beyond you in such a beautiful and elegant way. So those were some of the primary reasons in terms of writing this book, to kind of feel like I'm connecting back to the very people that I've always wanted to serve. But I found myself serving less and less and less as I continue to navigate this journey that I've been on.
That is so exciting. Love the concept too of this, ripple that turns into a tidal wave, right? You're starting with your circle, and it's so exciting. Can you tell us the meaning behind Black financial culture? And also, before we dive in, I just want to recognize Dr. Thomas here, a Black man. The three of us, Dr. Ross, Brian, and I are white dudes. And so please take us to school. But I'll also recognize we're here to, like you, Dr. Thomas, we're here to break down some of these barriers and misconceptions that people have about one another. And
absolutely.
So very excited to learn.
Yeah, man, that absolutely is a great question. And this is the thing, as human beings in general, I would love for us to be able to exist in spaces, to be able to view and see diversity for its beauty, because that's exactly what it is, right? I always say that, if someone writes a book on a monarch butterfly or orca whales, and actually I've had an opportunity to see orca whales live in action, hunt a seal, I will never get in the water with a pod of orca whales, like 100 yards apart, and they're communicating collectively. It was wow, right? And so, but me understanding something about orca whales and their migratory patterns and their hunting patterns and things of that nature never diminishes us learning about dolphins, right? Never diminishes us learning about great whales and white whales and different types of sharks. We just think about it as this beautiful piece of this fabric of life that's a part of this a part of this whole. So I think it's a beautiful thing to talk about diversity, and not just from phenotype, because that's one element of it, but then our experience is more important, because like Chris, you and I could come exactly from the same neighborhood and then operate under the same cultural themes because of our experiences growing up together based on how we internalize them. And so it gets so much deeper, right? Which is why it's also important to unpack and to begin to explore these things. So Black financial culture, there are three elements of it. The first element is Black financial culture, as in, so imagine I'm not a Black person, and maybe I'm a white gentleman, and I've written a book on Black financial culture. The immediate assumption may not be that he's talking about Black people. It could be that he's talking about culturally, how do we stay in the Black financially? No different than Black Friday.
Okay.
Right? You see where I'm going here?
Perspective.
You see where I'm going here? So the play on the wording was so incredibly important to me, because the way that you view it can trigger a different response that's based on your internal perceptions of something. So Black Finance, the first phase of this is just how do you stay in the Black financially? So that was and we're all, understanding of what that means. Like, again, like with the whole reference to Black Friday and this that nature, right? Black financial culture, Black Friday. Why can't Black Friday be for everyday people? If you get where I'm going here, right? Like, why are we so pressed to make sure that companies and corporations are in the Black, but yet we don't celebrate Black financial culture for the masses of the public? So that's the first theme and element. The second theme and element of this book is in Black as in the color Black, meaning how it absorbs all the rays of light. And so in this book, what I've tried to do effectively is to take in all these rays of light as it relates to different therapeutic methods, as it relates to what we know empirically is optimal in terms of goal attainment. Anything that I research or that I explore, that I understand academically, I talk about social capital. I talk about bounded rationality. I talk about these things, but not in an academic way. Solution focused therapy, person-centered therapy, like all these elements of everything that I'm engaging with are actually in this book. So it's a sea of light that's being absorbed, right? And then people are now getting to benefit in terms of seeing these things where they don't have to necessarily go behind a paywall to be able to read an article or a paper to kind of distill something down. And then I just get to the very minute points of these things and just use this in very practical ways. So that's that second point. The third point is Black financial culture in terms of what we would understand about Blackness and identity based on our experiences in the United States broadly, but more specifically, my experiences growing up in the Midwest, Gary, Indiana. So this is not me defining Black financial culture. This book is actually you seeing me navigate life and what I perceive to be Blackness and Black financial culture, and how I'm internalizing that and how it's manifesting itself through me, so that maybe you can begin to engage in your own money scripts, financial stories, and things of that nature in a way that's non-judgmental. And that's not me just pulling up every single last piece of data and fact about where Black people are and maybe how we aren't doing this, and then maybe historically why this isn't happening. I do touch on those points, but my goal here isn't to stay fixated on something that we can't control. My goal here is to say that, yes, we acknowledge these things. I acknowledge the hurt. I acknowledge some of the residue of the past and how it's impacted some things at present. But my fundamental question is this: if 400 years from now, our great, 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 great grandchildren are looking back and asking the question, like, well, what did they do then to help us be in a better position and situation today? Well, we actually get to rewrite that history. So what are we going to do about it? Utilizing economic agency where we are, thinking intergenerationally and starting small if we have to. And you and I know both, even if it's just $10 a month, starting now, and we set that and forget that for 400 years, for whatever person is going to receive that small chump change of $10 or $5 every other week, yeah. I take it. Right? Because we understand compounding and what this means over that amount of time. But unfortunately, when we're mired in our circumstances, we can't necessarily always see the long-term benefit of something. And I completely get that. I touch on that. But there is power in small when we start to think about life beyond our own. And what I'm nudging here is for Black financial culture in terms of Black communities and things of that nature. Like, I think that for our generation, this is the generation where we make the sacrifice of significant financial gain and establishing more consistent financial culture that leads to sustainable wealth creation, sustainable home ownership, sustainable entrepreneurial endeavors, not the fly by night. I'm just going to do this thing really quickly and not think about the consequences, because when we look at the data on home ownership, not only are African Americans likely to purchase a home maybe 5 to 6 years later than their white counterparts, they're also more likely to do it at higher interest rates in communities where they're not going to see the appreciation of the home if all things held identical to their white counterparts. And then not only that, and we don't talk about this, is that more African Americans lose their homes than any other groups and go back to renting. So you engage in this major expense and you navigate this entire process, and you actually put yourself in a negative position when it's all said and done. So I don't go into super detail in this book on those things, because that needs to just be another book on its own in terms of what I mean by sustainable home ownership and how we need to address the entire system of this in order to do it successfully. But those things are things that we have to address and understand that we are going to plant and sow some trees right now that we're never going to eat the fruit that comes from those trees. And every generation has to sacrifice something. So I'm really making a challenge of, with previous generations that have sacrificed so that you can experience what you're experiencing now. Well, what are you going to sacrifice in this moment so that future generations can experience even more? And I just feel like we're in this me culture moment right now. And I'm trying to fight against that a little bit, because one thing that we don't have is time. We can't give up another 60 or 70 or 80 years of inaction in areas where we could take action, because we just push the goalpost out even further. And this is the last thing I say. When I talk about wealth in this book, I make a juxtaposition between white wealth and Black wealth. However, my conversation isn't about closing a wealth gap. My conversation is, we just need to start the process of being intentional about creating wealth. I can control that in some capacity. I can't control what happens in terms of necessarily closing the gap, but what can I do to begin the process of creating wealth? So I'm changing the paradigm from trying to fight battles necessarily in some instances that we don't have a whole lot of control over or don't have the capacity to navigate those spaces. For people who are talking about reparations and things of that nature, let them do their work, right? And not muddy it down, because they have the expertise to navigate this successfully. Where you can be doing your work at this point, more specifically, is what small things that I can be doing to actually be building and positioning my family in such a way where we're creating a culture that I get to choose to make better and more sound financial decisions that achieve the end that I'm actually hoping for. I don't define that for you. You get to define that for yourself. And that's the beautiful thing about this book, is that it's not paternalistic. It is, I trust you to make the best decisions for you. Here are some things to consider while you are navigating your journey. You have the freedom. You have the economic agency to make a choice, but I just need you to make a choice. If you don't want to create wealth, that's fine. That's your choice. You're actually expressing economic agency if that's your choice, right? And so I'm putting the ball in that individual's court, creating some dissonance, right? For you to say that, hey, I do get to choose. What do I want to choose? And even if I don't have the capacity, I speak to Financial Therapy Association in book, accredited financial counselors, things of that nature to say that you now actually have exposure to potential avenues to help you deal with certain things that you're wrestling, to help you to position yourself to begin to make choice, right? So the whole idea is that I trust you, I believe in you, but I'm not going to tell you culturally within your household and what you feel is best for you necessarily to do. But I want you to define for yourself what you want Black financial culture to be for you. And I leave it there at the end of the book for that individual to make the choice themselves.
Wow. I tell you, Mike, go ahead.
Before we go to your, the next question for Dr. Thomas, can we appreciate Dr. Thomas for a moment here?
Absolutely.
Truly awesome. I had this, I don't know if he was a mentor or just someone I really admired when I was a teacher, who in describing the work to, chip away at some of the inequities that happen in education and in society at large, talked about each of our individual roles as we're not actually like even the running back on the football team. We are in this grander sports or football analogy. I know we got University of Kentucky, University of Georgia, and the Ohio State University represented on the call here. I'm from
UGA, back-to-back national champions.
Yes.
Let's just go ahead and let's just put it all out there. We're not just saying we have these other schools. We have these other schools, and then we have the national champions, University of Georgia.
And I'll say, I got my degree from UGA, so I still will always have.
Brian, you and I are outnumbered on national championships.
Dr. Thomas, it was really nice to have you. This will bring a conclusion.
Brian's going to mute
podcast.
I would not be surprised if we came back and this was just completely edited out. I was like, I know we had this random conversation.
Brian's face is just, it's just Buckeye red. Right? He's so.
That is.
But,
yes.
Anyway.
But congratulations, Dr. Thomas. Congratulations.
Yeah, it is what it is.
Congrats. And so back to the analogy, right? We're not even each of us is not even the running back. Each of us is not even the nose tackle. Each of us is a single fiber and a single muscle in the running back's leg. And we got to do our, in the grand scheme of history, our, whatever our talents are and strengths are, back to the football analogy, like we got to figure out how to contract that one little fiber and that one little muscle. In a football player's leg, that's a big muscle. So in that one big muscle, as we try to push the ball down the field, I think personally, I believe so many who want to make an impact on the world give up too soon because you can't throw a Hail Mary pass in one shot, right? And what you just described, Dr. Thomas, in your exploration of Black financial culture is a very similar notion. And so I just want to appreciate you for that, all football jokes aside. It's awesome. Can't wait to read it.
Yeah.
And I just want to add, I love how you weave three very complex areas of Black financial culture together. And you shift this, there's this focus on shifting this paradigm of what you can control. You're really building like this sense of agency for the readers, for the audience, for the larger community, really, as you said.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that's, God, that's powerful. Right.
I think, Bruce, I think the thing is, I think that sometimes we navigate life, and I've been here, where I think I'm making a choice, but I'm not really making a choice. I'm just operating in some habit that I established based on my upbringing or whatever it may be. But after some time, it feels like choice. Like I'm making a choice to do X, Y, and Z. But once we start to unpack some of the narratives, some of our hurts, even some of our joys, quite honestly, and understand how those things are integral in the way that we behave and we respond to life, or we've established some maladaptive behaviors to stress or whatever it may be. I can believe that I'm responding in such a way, but that's a body response to something, and not actually me actually assessing whether or not this is still optimal. Do I still need to do this? Right? Based on where I am in life. Right. So some people may be distrusting, right? And they may think that, oh, I'm just naturally that way. But you can be distrusting in the wrong environment where you have individuals that absolutely want to help you, absolutely want to support you, absolutely want to make a contribution to get some project off the ground. But if you take your distrust and the way that you respond to distrust as just being, this is just who I am, as you're navigating those spaces, it could literally close doors for you, right? Because in this space, in this system, you don't necessarily have to respond and behave in a certain way. However, in another system that you exist in, that may be vital to your survival. So this capacity to be able to differentiate and understand that I'm not navigating the same systems anymore. I'm not bounded by the same things anymore, but yet I'm still carrying the same strategies and tools and ways of mind in new spaces. I can completely blow an opportunity, not intentionally, but because I'm just operating in a way where I'm just going and not actually really engaging and thinking about what I'm doing. So if my distrust of the bank, is that really because I distrust the bank? Or is it because I was told not to trust the bank? Right? Is my lack of wanting to engage in investments because I'm really fearful of the markets? Or is it because I'm consuming content and information that's causing me to continuously be fearful of the markets? But yet I'm making these decisions under the guise that that's actually my choice. But is it really your choice? Or you're just falling in line with something? So my biggest thing is I just want to give people the space in the book to actually engage in certain conversations that maybe they would never engage in with themselves on a very intimate and vulnerable level, and ask themselves, is this really what I believe? And is this really true? Is this true all of the time? And does it still apply with where I am? And I think that those are very powerful questions to ask, because I think in that it keeps people bounded, even when they have the resources, even when they have the access, even when they have the opportunity. If I'm still using the paradigms from my hurt, from my trauma in these new systems where there's opportunity, I will completely blow that opportunity. And so I just want people to be intentional about their agency. And it's, again, me not telling them how to do that, but encouraging them to be thoughtful, to question, and to consider what might be another possibility if I would choose to do that. That's it.
Right. Well, that's the thing about building your sense of agency. You can't tell someone to have agency.
Right? You can't really. You can try. That's never worked out well for me. But
I love how you smoothly guide them to that sense of agency through their own reflection.
Yes. Not through their experiences, but through my experiences. Right? So they're externalizing, they're seeing this thing that's externalized. But my hope is that you say, oh, that happened to me. Or, oh, I completely feel like, but it's not a me trying to reveal you to you. It's me trying to help you see you through me, where you may be more confident in exploring yourself because of my vulnerabilities. Right? So you don't have to be ashamed of your vulnerabilities, because I'm being incredibly vulnerable in this book in a lot of different areas where I still kind of felt I actually was not going to release it, because there are some points in this that are traumatic, that were deeply hurtful. As I was writing this, there were moments when I'm writing this and I'm crying through the chapters because I'm revisiting things that I'm good at compartmentalizing and moving on. And I had to open some drawers that I knew that I needed to open, in order to fully grasp the full depth and visceral emotions, so that in some way that someone could feel something, understand the consequence of something, without ever having to navigate it themselves. Like, there should be some moments in this book where you'll say, well, I see clearly where this goes, and I don't have to go there because I get it. Right. There's elements of bitterness, whether it's bitterness that I've experienced or bitterness that I've seen in the lives of other people. There's one book that I tell about a gentleman that I had a really good relationship with. At the end of his life, he was just filled with bitterness. And there's some things that we don't talk about as it relates to estate planning. Yes, you can create a great estate plan. However, if something happens within the life of that individual where relationships are ruined, there's betrayal, there's distrust, there's all these different things, people will go to no end, financially and otherwise, to make sure that they inflict hurt upon someone who's hurt them. Even if that means sacrificing wealth. Wealth is not off the table when it comes to that. And I've just seen it over and over again in the work that I do. When you have hurt people with large sums of money, they will hurt people with the way that they use the money to hide that money, spend all the money, blow the money, and not care anything about anything else generationally. And so there's an element within the book where I talk about why forgiveness is a wealth creation strategy, and how the lack of forgiveness, even as you're navigating this journey, can actually undermine every bit of progress that you've made. Because that bitterness, that hurt, and that pain, oftentimes what I've seen people do is that they'll weaponize their resources to hurt other people. So yeah, on paper, someone looks great, but is this really going to lead to the end that we're hoping for? Not necessarily. And that's why you hear me constantly throughout the book talk about sustainable efforts, and not just these flash in the pan efforts where somebody had a lot of money, then all of a sudden it's gone, and everybody's like, well, the ride was good while it lasted. Right? Just heard too many of those stories. And so I go there because I want to make sure that as we're having these conversations, we're not just talking about the optimal strategy in this moment. We're also talking about, in real life, as people who do this work, what we see along the arc of this journey, even while you're trying to do the right thing today, that can present itself as a potential barrier that we have to begin to insulate ourselves from, protect ourselves from, because these other things can undermine doing the right thing now. This is not the end of the race. Starting the race is not the end of the race. And there's so much more to this process. But oftentimes we only talk about these things from the optimal financial strategy standpoint of it, but not all the messiness that happens in the lives of everyday people that people never see, and then realize that, oh, I wish I would have known this, or I wish I would have known that. In a very compact way, I try to explore those themes to make people aware that even once you start the race, this is a marathon, and you need to be very intentional about how you're protecting your heart, how you're protecting your mind, how you're protecting yourself, also the people around you in this wealth creation journey. Because if you don't do those things, money in and of itself is not going to be enough.
Yeah, very true. I know this was a very personal experience writing this book. I mean, yeah. I can hear your vulnerability as you speak, as you've talked about your experiences. I mean, really, what was it like writing this book for you?
Yeah, it was initially starting it, just getting started was really, really tough. And I honestly, I would think that that's a similar experience for anybody. It's like as you're navigating,
you didn't even want to release it to begin with.
Yeah, right. It's like you're thinking end in mind, and just how far you're away from the end, wherever that end may be. So that was really, really tough. But as I kept getting further and further into the book, there were several times where I literally had to step back and say that, you know what, I can't write this without having this conversation. I can't write this without having this conversation. Am I comfortable with, am I okay with having these conversations? And the reason why I struggled with it is because I'm not the type of person that's trying to sow division, or to take narratives or language in any type of way to put my spin on it. To agendaize is kind of like what a word I like to use. It's not really a word. Something that someone has done for my own benefit to leverage some viewpoint necessarily. That's not, and I don't want my book to be used in that way, but I know that we exist in that type of culture. Like someone will take something in a book, maybe a line, right, that has no context whatsoever in terms of what came in a previous paragraph or the paragraphs to follow, take that little snippet and create their own delusional perspective of how they want to spin it. That's the space that we live in. And I've really struggled with that every step of the way because honestly, y'all, I don't like it here. I don't like the space that we navigate. Every headline, every this or that or the other. There's just misinformation that abounds. And then Absolutely. For the very few people that actually go in and actually read the article then will be written in such a way where it's like, well, why didn't they just say that?
Yeah.
But they know it's all everything is clickbait-ish, but to a point though that it literally does drive division. And my struggle with this was that even in writing this book and titling it in a way that I titled it could literally potentially sow some division based on someone's perception of something, and then even begin to question, well, why do you have to talk about Blackness? Why do we have to continue to talk about this? Why do we have to X, Y, and Z, whatever it may be? And then not realize that this is a lived experience for me, quite honestly. So I don't have the benefit of not navigating what Blackness is, quite honestly. Which has always been a fascinating journey. Yes.
You started with saying something that all of us are passionate about and strongly believe, that diversity is a beautiful thing.
Yes.
And it's a part of our value sets. It's a part of who we are at Modern Husbands. Absolutely. Can you explain to the everyday person, what are some examples that diversity can bring to their world that will that will bring them joy, that will bring them better understanding, that will make them just better all around people.
Yeah.
And that how they can take that and then use that to shape the values of their own family.
Yeah. You know what, there's a part in the book where I talk about, I think it was maybe about a year and a half ago, I posted something on Facebook asking people, saying, well, what are your perceptions about Black financial culture? And this is predominantly part of my Facebook group, African American individuals. And I started to see themes of not good with money, poor credit scores, no home ownership, don't own anything. And these are all Black people sharing these paradigms about their perception of Black financial culture. Don't have life insurance, GoFundMe accounts, this or that or the other. And then so in the book, I had mentioned if it was only African Americans or Black people in general who lacked this understanding about debt management, the need for life insurance, this or that or the other, is there any way that Dave Ramsey will have been able to have built the empire that he built?
That's a good way to put it.
If it was only Black people who struggled with these things financially, would it have ever have been possible for him to have built the empire that he built? Because that would suggest to me that there is no problem to be solved in the white community, generally speaking, and white evangelical community, generally speaking. That's not the case at all. And then I go in a little bit further and I say that I actually do this work. I serve everybody, and everybody's asking me the same questions. It's not a whole lot different, quite honestly, when you start hearing the backstories and how this family member did this, or my parents aren't saving any money, or dad did this and he gambled away X, Y, and Z, or financial infidelity was committed and mom just found out that there's $100,000 in debt somewhere. We don't know how we're going to, like, this stuff is not just it's not just a Black issue. But on the same flip side of it, not one person said that there's Black wealth creation, Black entrepreneurship that's happening, Black X, Y, and Z, and that's happening as well. Right? So there's this very skewed perspective where it's almost like we have to be on polarized opposite ends of the spectrum, where there's no space for both to be true. That we actually have African Americans that are doing extremely well and doing all these things that are financially optimal. And on the flip side, that you actually have white households that aren't doing these things optimally. Right? And so in navigating this in terms of the beauty of diversity, just like shame and guilt, is that it's very difficult to want to be seen when you feel like you're the only one. And then the construct of power oftentimes is not revealing your vulnerabilities to let other people know that you're also struggling with the same thing. So what happens is the person who has power in some instances, or perception of power, it is perceived that they have it all together. And then for the person who is actually financially fragile, who needs to help and things like that, because their perception of someone with power, they wrestle with not getting help and kind of staying stuck and fixed in their state or whatever it may be, because they don't realize that they're not alone and they're not the only people dealing with this stuff. So then we hide, right? And then nothing gets better. Okay. So I think that the beauty of diversity is understanding that even though there are some things that are culturally that may be different, but culture is typically born out of circumstances, the place in which you lived, what were the norms, what was the faith that you were born into, how does that faith manifest itself in a way that you engage in things societally, how are men viewed, how are women viewed. There are so many different things that impact and affect culture that actually have nothing to do with my skin tone or color. All right. It's about these systems in which you navigate. But beyond that, though, just like within our DNA, we realize that, oh, yeah, where there are these few things that we may not agree on or believe, or we actually believe the same things, but we have differing opinions on how we get there, but we still care we want to get there. But just like with our DNA, if I would look at my DNA compared to you all's, about 99% of it is the same. It's just these minute little things or differences that reflect themselves that then cause for the way that our physical structure looks to be different, right? And so the beauty of diversity and understanding diversity and seeing diversity is that we actually get to see how we're actually living and sharing more similar experiences than not. But if we do not engage in diversity and engaging in closing proximity to actually feel, touch, and be in the spaces, what happens is that we have gaps of knowledge, gaps of access, gaps of interaction. And when we live in a system and a culture that completely sows distrust, I'm not going to fill the gap with, oh, I'm still going to believe the best about this person, right? We naturally don't fill gaps with positivity, hope, and optimism. We fill gaps with fear and anxiousness and all these other different things because that's a protection mechanism, generally speaking. So my goal with this and the goal with understanding and engaging with diversity is that even in our differences, we still find commonality if we're willing to close the gap. And then we realize that, oh, this person's actually really cool. Oh, I have actually more in common with this person than I do with someone else. Oh, I heard that this person was X, Y, and Z, but that's not really what that is at all. And it doesn't come from the place in terms of where I thought that came from. Oh, that's very different. It's no different than like, Bruce, if you're working with a couple, right? And you know just as well as I do, when couples aren't connecting, it's because there's a gap. And then what couples do you know when there's a gap? Fill it with love and hope and enthusiasm, right? Like no couple does. Yeah. Not in real life, right? Because if that were the case, someone wouldn't be anxiously attached, right? And then assuming the worst in I texted this person. They didn't call me back. They must be with somebody else. Why do we do that? So if we can understand that paradigm from just being in a relationship, surely we can understand this paradigm from the way that we view race. Because if we're not filling the gap with positive information and thinking the best about someone, and these are people that we don't know, and look at the lengths that we go through in relationships with someone that I do know and I say that I love, right? So diversity is embracing diversity, closing proximity, and actually engaging and understanding people is so incredibly important. So for instance, when during the Super Bowl, Chris Stapleton sang the national anthem, and I posted on Facebook, I was like, man, that dude can sing. I would never listen to Chris, but I went to one of my platforms that I use to listen to music, and I pulled up Chris Stapleton's music, and I've just been rocking out to it ever since. I never would have heard Chris Stapleton until I heard him sing the national anthem. That was my opportunity to close proximity, to engage with, to hear someone, perspective, lens, life, culture, love, relationships I never would have before. And he's actually probably one of my favorite people that I listen to on repeat right now.
Interesting.
But I would have never, if somebody would have just said, like, Christian, if you just said, Mike, you really need to listen to Chris Stapleton, I was like, no, I'm good, bro. A lot of people struggle with diversity, not because they don't want to close proximity, but if they close proximity and others within their system don't, they become an outlier. Mm-hmm. And it takes courage, and we don't talk about this enough, to act and bravery to actually engage in this process of closing proximity. Because what happens is if other people within your system aren't coming with you, you can actually feel isolated and alone. And that's another conversation that's there. But this book, my hope with this book, though, is that for the people that know me, Black, white, Asian, Latinx, whatever it may be, as they're reading it and engaging with it, because of the relationships that I have with them, maybe they can see my vulnerabilities, my experiences, my highs and my lows in such a way that gives them the space and the desire to want to close the gap with other people in their circles and in their systems to want to see them in a way that promotes a sense of shared humanity, where they feel as if, you know what, there's probably a lot more that I have in common with this person than not. And that really, at the end of the day, is the goal. And if we do that, then we create diversity of social capital. If we have diversity of social capital, that means that we have more information that's coming into our systems that can provide us with the tools and things of that nature to expand and grow our social capital networks. And then we can continue to build and build, build. And then hopefully, at the end of the day, it creates more connection and community and a sense of community than not. And then we can all win in some capacity.
I really appreciate how you pulled all of that together so our listeners understand the importance of reading books such as yours, because it grows who we are. The point that you made that is really sticking with me is that it fills the gap with positivity.
Yes.
Like, diversity works. So like,
right. Some people won't believe that, Christian, no matter how much you say it. Like, some people are like, why do we have to have this conversation?
Yeah.
It's fascinating to me. And it's not just, and diversity isn't just black or white.
Right.
And unfortunately, that's immediately where it goes. It's so much bigger than that. So anyway.
Well, and let me add one thing, Christian.
Yeah.
It's not out yet. Well, it might be out when we release this, but Yaneli's book, Mind Your Money. She literally told me she wrote that for the Latinx population, people that are in their 20s to 30s. And I'm reading it right now, and it's brilliant. But yeah, there's financial lessons in it. It's great. But what's so great about it is I'm looking at life through her eyes as she grew up.
Yeah.
And it's creating like a different perspective on the world. So anyhow, Christian, go ahead.
I was just going to say to hammer home that diversity works, and diversity of all types. If you look at investing, for example, companies within the S&P 500 that are run by women or have a large percentage of the C-suite, as women, outperform the S&P 500.
Yep.
Right? So as we close proximity between women's perspectives in the workplace and men's perspectives in the workplace, investors, shareholders, and employees at those companies are all benefiting. Right?
Absolutely.
It works. Like, it literally
That's a
works.
great point. Wow, great point.
The other example famously is school integration. The only education intervention that has ever worked at scale to improve the reading and math levels of all students, white kids, black, all students, boys, girls, is integration. During the civil rights movement. That is the only large-scale education intervention that has produced gains for everybody. If that doesn't show that diversity works, I don't know. I don't know what does.
It's one of those things, like with us having this conversation, it's like we're preaching to the choir. It's almost like we'd have to have 4 other people come on that just have a completely opposing view. And then we just got to go back and forth in a sensible and civil way, and respected way to talk about, well, what is the pushback? Because as you and I both know, is that the pushback generally is there's some type of hurt that they feel that is very personal to them in some capacity, or something that's unfair or whatever it may be. And I can definitely understand a lot of those things conceptually, because as I write about in the book, I spent a lot of time with my great grandmother, who was born in 1910. She didn't pass away until 2007. And she had all of her cognitive faculties up to that point. I spent many summers with her, and she would literally share with me what life was like for her growing up from 1910 on. And my mother was raised by her grandmother. And there were certain mindsets and beliefs that were put in my mom's head about limitations on Blackness, which is the last chapter that I write about in this book. And so for someone to say, well, I feel like the way that the world revolving around me feels as if it's becoming limiting. That's a shared experience in some capacity in terms of the feelings of what that may be. And if we go back and we look at culturally, historically, we look at law, we look at a lot of different things that were in place, that was very much so a reality in some capacity.
Guys, we fixed it. The whole system, we fixed it.
We did.
Wait. With
It's
one
done.
exception, I don't want people to walk away though believing that Georgia football is better than Ohio State. That's the only thing we didn't fix.
Well, you know what? We're 100 days away. So
yeah, we are.
So we're 100 days away. The truth will be in the pudding regardless, and I'm pretty sure that I'm putting my money on UGA.
Yeah,
so.
And we could even save this podcast and release
Let's
it.
Just say, run it back, flip. End of the season next year. Let's look at the polls, and I'm pretty sure we're going to be on top. And Brian,
I'm looking forward to that.
We can have a gentleman's bet. We can have a gentleman's bet, or if you want to put some money, we can do this off camera. I'd be more than happy to do that too. Just let me know.
I tell you what, Dr. Thomas, here's the gentleman's bet. When Ohio State beats Georgia, you have to change all your social media profiles to the Ohio State logo for 24 hours. And then I'll do the reverse if by chance UGA
all right
can
bet. And not only that, you or I would have to post a video on our social media platforms talking about how great the other school is.
The problem with that is that the video that
you're
you would
already
create,
backing out of it.
The video that you would create would have to be so long. I mean, I guess mine could be more like a promo, like one of those 15-second clips. So you're on. All right. So there has to be a video.
Everybody's recognized it. Yes. So
we have this bed recorded now.
This was a pleasure. Thank you, Dr.
Absolutely.
Thomas.
Thank you all. Thank you all.
Thanks for joining us today. Don't forget to click subscribe wherever you download your podcasts and share the Modern Husbands podcast with your friends. A special thanks to our guest and, of course, to all of our listeners. Please be on the lookout for new and exciting announcements on modernhusbands.com. Until next time, be well.